Hi, my name is Robert-Falcon Ouellette, Robertfalcon, Ouellette or Ouellette or Ouellette, Ouellette, depending on if you're French, English, or just like pronouncing my name differently. So thank you very much for having me here today.
And of course, you're welcome to sit if you'd like.
I don't know, like, I feel kind of, I'll sit after the general remarks. I come from Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, so I am Nehio or Cree. Originally grew up mostly in Calgary. I have 2 master's degree, a PhD in anthropology. I was in the military for 27 years. I have 5 beautiful children, and what else can I talk about myself? Oh, I was a university professor for 5 years, and I'm still a university professor. I was also, was a member of Parliament for 4 years, from 2015 to 2019. And it was the chair of the Indigenous Caucus, the chair of the Human Trafficking Caucus, all parliamentary, chair on the Finance Committee, as well as the Health Committee. And I was the very first First Nations person to ever be on the Finance Committee in Canadian history. And the very first chair of the Indigenous Caucus, because we never had an Indigenous Caucus ever before. It's a very important historic moment in 2015, because we had enough members to actually form a caucus. And I'm running for mayor for the city of Winnipeg, which is more important. And I'm running on my first issue. If I could deal with one thing as mayor in 4 years, if I could really do that really well, it would be homelessness, mental health, and addictions. I think the addictions issue leads to a lot of issues surrounding crime. It touches on a lot of the downtown core. It touches on feelings of safety. It touches on our buses, where bus drivers are right now afraid to even be on the buses themselves. Wanting to hide behind shields, wanting bigger shields, more shields. They want security forces on the bus, and so I think there are so many issues that need to be dealt with related to the addictions issue. And my case is that I'm making is we've been getting or appointing or electing people to positions of authority in our city for a long time, who, while they say yes, it's important, at the end of the day they feel that it's actually not important. Because they actually end up associating with other things. As anthropologists, we end up going with the same social groups over and over again. And so I find what usually politicians do is they'll make a quick funding announcement, $800,000 or $1 million for something, and then whatever issue that is, violence against women or women's shelter, and then they go back to talking to the groups that really matter to them, land developers, construction projects, trying to build a bridge, pour some cement, and make a lot of money. And so that's generally what I find happens. And so this election, I think, is an opportunity, because it seems that more people are aware about what's going on in our downtown core and actually think it's really important, because the downtown core, the heart of our city, bled out literally into the suburbs, and it now resides in our bus shelters, and people have woken up to that issue. And so I think this is an opportunity for the city of Winnipeg to chart a different course and maybe choose a different leader who's not going to be so focused, will be focused on doing potholes and looking after the businesses, but who's going to be actually thinking about day in and day out how we can actually make homelessness no longer not something that happens every day in our city, but something that would be extraordinary if someone was homeless.
So homelessness, of course, is one of our topics, but we're going to start off with transit, and
okay.
And we're going to turn to Emma to take us away.
Hi there. I just mentioned transit safety, but I wanted to ask you, what would be your first steps to safer transit?
Yeah.
And how are you planning on doing it?
Oh, that is thank you very much for the question about transit. So I think I'm going to start with kind of a few stats. So in 1984, there were 64 million rides which occurred with Winnipeg Transit. Today, there are 21 million rides. The population of the city increased from 591,000 to 834,000, or 34 million, sorry, 591 million to 800 and, I'm getting my stats messed up. But 591 to 834,000 people live in the city. So the population increased, yet less people are riding the buses. So something's been going on. So there's 4 things you actually want to do on the buses. One, we want to make them safe. Second one is we want to make them affordable to drive up ridership. We also want to make them more convenient, and we want to make them cleaner. So the first one concerning safety, we want to put in place a zero tolerance policy for any violence on the buses, any harassment. We want to make this transit supervisors not just supervising transit bus drivers, but actually giving them peace officer status in the city with appropriate training and de-escalation and making sure that they have the skills, but also trying to make sure that they can deal with the situations right away. And so they would be the first line. On very problematic routes, we want to make sure that there's security personnel available, just people going around, just being security like you see in the supermarkets. And then, and finally, and by that I mean that when I talk about a sorry, I'm thinking in French here. I apologize. A zero tolerance policy against violence. It means that the bus will actually not move. So it will wait there until it's actually dealt with, and then we will ban individuals from riding the bus. If need be, we will make sure the police actually respond. Right now, they do not always respond in a timely way to any incidents that go on the bus, and they will respond because I think it's actually serious enough that it's caused huge disruption and financial problems for the citizens of the city. The next part is actually trying to get people on the bus. So we want to make it more affordable. So we're going to make the buses $1 to ride. And we think it will cost around $12 million is our estimate. But if we saw the numbers from 64 million to 21 million, we think we can actually drive up ridership and more people will actually end up taking the bus. So this will end up being probably a good thing. And the benefits to other parts of the issues our city's dealing with, for instance, the potholes, or the environment, we're talking about the environment. This will actually get more cars off the road, so this is extremely important. The third part is making them more convenient. We want to put in place like a metro bus system, which they have in Quebec City, they put that in place in, I think, 1998, and they saw a 30% increase in ridership within the first year. And so because they're metro buses means there's a couple major routes which are very used quite a bit, and so they become the main backbone and artery of their entire transportation system. And I think we can do this. I don't think it's super complicated, and so I want to move forward with the transit master plan related to that. And then finally, making the buses clean. No one likes to get on a bus and sit down and say, why is the bus seat wet, or what happened? No one likes to see a dirty bus, especially in the winter when there's mud everywhere and you don't want to put your bags on the ground. The buses need to be clean all the time. And the goal is to drive up ridership, which will actually be better for the environment and better for the bottom line for the city.
Yeah, of course.
And better for the roads, because you won't have so many cars on the road.
How much money are you planning to spend on new training programs for bus drivers and implementations that you're planning?
That actually I hadn't considered more training programs for bus drivers, but I had considered the whole training issue surrounding making the transit supervisors peace officers. So there will be some training that will be required for them in order to enable them to have de-escalation techniques and how to speak with passengers which are disruptive, which are maybe having mental health challenges or drug addiction issues. So that usually a police officer training program can last anywhere. If you go, like for instance, the Canadian Border Agency, their training can last anywhere between 13 weeks to 6 months, and so like I would see something similar as well for a peace officer working for the city. Because they might, if something does happen, they do have to be prepared for all eventualities. But obviously we want to have no violence. The goal is to have good conversations and calming situations down, and if it continues, that the person will no longer be allowed to get on the bus.
And one more question. You had mentioned problematic routes.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, there are certain routes in the city, from my understanding, that have a lot of problems. Just where they're located, going by certain areas which might have people who have more social issues than others. And so in this case, you can check, like, the transit drivers will be, saying, like, I've had an incident today, I had another incident here. And so if those are, those routes are having more problems, then maybe we should have someone who's there a little bit more frequently to just be on the bus, walk around the bus, and then get off the next stop and get on the next bus, and just show that there's a presence and that we're taking safety very seriously and we want people to be calm. There is a principle with Jane Jacobs, who's an urban designer. I don't know if you know about her, but more eyes there are the safer it feels. So often, like if you have a lot of police officers, as an example, sometimes people won't be doing crimes right in front of the police officer. They'll wait till they're off, but it creates a sense of security. It creates a sense that, that nothing's going to happen there, and that's very important, I think, for the rider experience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move on to roads with Caleb Dewar.
Oh.
Yes, I might be wrong, but I don't think your platform specifically mentions roads. So, do you have a proposal for road renewal? It's a big issue for Winnipeggers. Have you figured out what you would do about the many roads that need repair and all our issues with urban sprawl?
Yeah, so the roads, what I've talked about is actually good urban design. So I think there's a lot of issues related to urban design and how we design the city. We seem to continually want to spread out, and we don't do mixed neighborhoods. We do the same old box type of housing. Big house, 2,000 square feet, garage attached to it, and it just seems to expand the city. And so what we actually want to do this is thinking very long term though, is making sure that we actually have mixed neighborhoods where you actually have different types of housing which are in a neighborhood with different types of businesses. The corner store is a good example of having that. And so making sure that the bylaws are changed in the planning department so that we can actually have that. And you're talking about, I'll get back to the roads. One of the things, I was talking about the buses is trying to get more cars off the roads, making sure that we continue to advance in that direction, and making sure that the good public transit system is available, and then continuing the investments which we're making with the federal government money. So before I was elected MP, there was actually not a lot of money for roads, and the roads were in a very, very poor state even before 2015. And when I was on the finance committee, I met with a lot of mayors and others, and they made proposals, and we made a recommendation to the finance minister to give more monies to cities to invest in their infrastructure. And so all cities across Canada actually received more funds. Those funds, we need to continue advocating to get those dollars, because obviously, the federal government has a lot of money, and the cities often do not have a lot of money unless people want to pay more taxes. So I think they had record amounts of investment last year. So, I'm willing to consider if people, continue moving forward, trying to get more investment into their roads and into our infrastructure. But it's not something, if I could really do one thing as mayor in 4 years, we're going to do the roads as best we can. But what we're actually going to be working on is homelessness, mental health, and addictions. Because I think, if you think about it, think about the addictions. It leads to crime. It leads to more policing. We spend more on policing than any other city in the country. We spent $320 million last year on policing. If we spent the Canadian average, we'd probably be spending in around $200 million. What would people spend $100 million extra every year? I would be spending it on roads. I'd be spending it on community infrastructure, school or community centers, on good programming for kids. I'd be spending it on better infrastructure, better buildings, more affordable housing. But if you spend that's the cost of the addictions issue in our city. And people fail to realize it, but the drumbeat of hire more police officers has been made for so many decades that it actually leads to us not investing in other things. But I would actually say that I would love to do an LRT study to make the transit system even better. So a light rail transit study, a rail study, to actually get the costing on this, because we do have a lot of spur lines throughout the city. And in Calgary, as an example, this actually gets a lot of cars off the roads, which reduces the taxation on the city infrastructure. So this was developed in 1988 using a lot of currently existing rail lines. And so this would be something that I'm very interested to have a look at, because we do have a lot of rail lines in the city, but we're not using them for, I think, a better use of value for the community.
Let's move on then to active transportation.
Hi, I'm Rachel.
Hey, Rachel.
How important is active transportation to you, and what do you plan to do about it?
It's very important. When I was the MP, I was able to get more monies that were almost 100% funded by the federal government for active transit and transportation in the city. And so, for instance, a lot of the new bike lanes you see in the city were actually funded almost wholly by the federal government with a few funds from the city. So I was very proud about that work. Obviously, when you ever redevelop, when I talk about good urban design, you have to actually, because it lasts for 50 years, you actually have to, when you're redoing roads, I continue to see roads being redeveloped, and we don't include anything on the side. Even though it wouldn't take any space away from a car, we don't include anything for the bikes. And I think there's a tendency in the city to want to pour a lot of cement on this, but sometimes if you look at other cities in Montreal or Sherbrooke or Three Rivers or Quebec City, what they actually put down is bollards, which are just plastic, which keep the cars and separate the cars from the bikes, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. And then you actually have active transportation infrastructure in more places in the city, and it's more cost affordable for the city to do instead of trying to pour cement. But cement, as you know, is a very important thing of the construction industry, and a lot of politicians love talking to the construction industry, and they love getting donations from people from the construction industry. I will say no more. Corruption, corruption, corruption.
Do you have any specific projects in mind to address active transportation in the city?
Do I have any more projects?
Specific projects in mind?
Well, I think we need to have an active transportation system where you can get around the city and make it a viable choice. I think it's a little unsafe for a lot of people because, if you, for instance, they just redid Osborne, and I still continue to see bikes going down there, and I'm not sure how safe that is to go down Osborne. But they just report all the cement. If you go in some of the other larger neighborhoods where the boulevards are actually quite wide, once again, it's a very simple thing to actually just go down and just say, paint the lines a little differently. You're not removing any lanes for the cars, but you're actually creating space for a bike where they could go on, and you put down the bollards where you put the screws in, and it's just a little plastic thing, hard plastic, and if the car hits it, they're going to hurt their car, but it protects the bikers. And I've lived in cities like Ottawa and Quebec City when I was in the military, where you have active transportation systems which are viable, and people don't use their cars as much. I used to never use my car in Ottawa, nor did I ever use it in Quebec City. I would always take my bike because it was fun, exercise, get to work. They would have showers there, in the facility where you could go, whether I was working at the University of Laval or at the military base or just working at that consultancy agency. They always had space that you could go to, and it was encouraged.
One of your pledges is to include safe family cycling in plans for active transportation. What
Yes.
exactly does that mean, and is there any funding dedicated to it?
Once again, I think it comes back to making sure that if your children are not, so it comes back to a policy we want to put in place called the Child-Friendly City Policy. So the Child-Friendly City Policy means that all the city policies have to be looked at through the eyes of our children and our youth to make sure it benefits them. So if we're going to be putting in place active transit, would we be comfortable with our children using it? Would our children be comfortable being on the buses by themselves? Would our children be comfortable being in certain areas of the city? And so I think these are the questions that the city politicians have to ask more of, because if we're not comfortable with our children being there, then how can we be comfortable with our seniors or anyone else who might be vulnerable? People who might be from northern communities, maybe indigenous, women late at night. And so this type of policy, the goal is to actually make a much safer city for more people, but to actually make people consider, the ramifications of their decision and how it actually impacts the community in the long term. So if we're actually putting in place active transit, and it was for families, would you be willing to take your child down that road? Would you be willing to have a carrier behind your bike? Or would you say, there's no way that I'm doing this? It's too crazy.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to sort of brings us back to the top, homelessness with Shauna, who's teamsing in, so to speak.
Shall I come in space, Shona?
Okay.
Okay. Hey, that's it.
Hello. So obviously homelessness is a very important issue to you. Can you expand on how you plan to combat it? And then I'll have specific follow-up questions.
Combat is a strong word. I don't want to combat anyone. I want to work with people. I know we always, like in politics, we love saying, I'm going to fight. But at the end of the day, also, we need to work with people. And so that's what I intend to do, is actually work with an organization called End Homelessness Winnipeg. In 2014, End Homelessness Winnipeg had a plan to end homelessness in 10 years in the city of Winnipeg. And I was part of that debate because it was in the 2014 mayoral election. And all the politicians who were in that debate said, yes, what a great idea, we're going to do this. And they were supposed to have built 1,500 homes. The problem is, once again, the people who get elected end up focusing on the things that they want and not the things that are actually necessary to our city. And so they forgot about this. And it got pushed off to the wayside. Now, I did not forget, incredibly enough, when I was an MP, because I thought about it every day, because I would go down, I put my riding office right in the heart of some of the issues where people on Ellis Avenue and right by Maryland, people die in front of my office. People who are homeless in the area come into the office, spend time with us every day. And we were actually managed to get more money out of the federal government with the Reaching Home policy. So $70 million was allocated to End Homelessness Winnipeg in 2019. Obviously, they're still having their challenges, and I believe the challenges are related to leadership at the civic level and supporting them to actually get this done. And so I'm going to be working with them quite extremely closely to make sure that they have all the supports necessary to succeed. So their goal is to build 1,340 homes and different types of housing options for people who are homeless to get people off the streets. And they have obviously a very long, detailed plan. I also have that on my website. You can see every single detail. But there's actually something also related to that, which I think is extremely important. It's addictions. One, I continue to meet people who want addictions treatment in the streets, who want help, whether they're begging on the side of this road or they're just walking around. And continuously they're denied the access to these services in our city, with wait times which can reach, at one point, were 18 months to get addictions treatment, generally 9 months. Today I think it's in the 3-month range. But that is still far too long. So if you say to someone, I want to get off drugs today and I'm living on the streets, you have to wait 3 months before you can. The chaos that you can cause, or the overdose that occur, there were 407 overdoses in the province of Manitoba last year, with the vast majority in the city of Winnipeg. This is a huge problem. So we need to make sure that there is treatment right away for anyone who needs it. The second aspect is actually putting all options on the table and stop dilly-dallying about and saying, well, you know, maybe we can't do this and we can't do this. Let's put all options on the table. So I'm willing to put in place a supervised consumption site with federal approval, because we're currently allowed to do that, with or without the province's approval. We need to move forward. It's time to no longer wait around for people to come together and say, well, maybe we want to or maybe we don't want to. I think we've discussed this long enough. It's time to move forward. Go it alone or go in collaboration with the province, because it's really impacting everything going on in this city. The second one is making sure that people have access to prescribed pharmaceuticals so they don't have to go see the drug dealer to obtain their drugs. Because if you have to get your drugs from a drug dealer, you're probably committing crime to do it. And that's expensive, and it's expensive to the cops, it's expensive to people having their garages broken into the West End or in various other neighborhoods in Windsor Park or in anywhere in the city, or their cars broken into. Because people, when they need their drugs, they're going to get them any way they possibly can, even through prostitution. And so we need to make sure that we treat this as a healthcare issue and not a criminal issue using the police. Because the police, while they're a great Swiss Army knife, and we've been using them as a Swiss Army knife, are not the right tool for a healthcare crisis. The other aspect we need to make sure is that we actually have, with the addictions issue, is making sure that we have a recovery. So at 2 o'clock in the morning when you have a problem and you're thinking of like reusing drugs, that there is someone available to talk to. As someone who's in the military, who was dealing with soldiers sometimes who had problems, and we were told sometimes, even recently, well, you can call back in a couple weeks, we can make an appointment for you then. That is not the right response to someone who is suicidal. When someone has a challenge, they need to meet with someone right away. And so those are the actual realities going on in our city, and I tell you, the chaos it causes on all the other city programs is substantial. Because if you're paying for the police, if you're paying for the firefighters, the paramedics, if you're paying for businesses who can't open up downtown, if people don't want to come downtown and spend money, it's expensive to run a city like that. Because we just spread the city out instead of actually building up where there's already these services that can be available for, the roads, the piping, the sewage, the water, the gas, natural gas, the heating, the electricity. It's much cheaper to do it where there's already people living, instead of trying to build a gated community.
Thank you. So you say you plan to create the 1,340 additional housing
Yep.
units within homelessness. How much of the city's budget do you plan to allocate towards this project?
So actually downtown, we have 20% of our downtown core is a vacant lot right now. And 20% of that is actually owned by government. Every time I was an MP, I would have community groups that would come see me and ask for money from Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation to develop housing. Usually before it was a third from the group or the city, a third from the province, and a third from the feds. We changed the rules to make it even almost 100% federal dollars, because we couldn't get the city or the province to buy in and work with us. So I am willing to make sure that those community groups have access to those lands so they can apply to CMHC to build more affordable housing, like End Homelessness Winnipeg. And that will go a long way to addressing that. I'm also going to be taxing those vacant lots downtown. It's going to generate $65 million, and I'm going to be using the provincial election as a lever to obtain the rights and the changes to the Canadian Winnipeg Charter, or the law that governs the governance of the city of Winnipeg, in order to get the right to tax those vacant lots as if they're 4-story buildings. Because it literally creates dead zones in our city that are not safe for people to be around. If you're there on the weekend and you're walking around and someone's walking down the street, and people will often cross the side will cross the side of the street to go on the other side to avoid that person. That's not how a city should be. You should need people, you need businesses, you need thriving nightlife, day life, you need multi-types of users, families, and you need a supermarket. Anyways, this is all interconnected. I don't know if you can see, but the vision we have for the city is like, it's not just like, I'm not just dealing with homelessness. There is an overall arching vision about what I want to develop in this city. And it's all interconnected. It's an Indigenous philosophy. It's the idea of holism, that everything is interconnected. We cannot separate stuff from other things. And if you only want to deal with one little thing and forget about another thing, you're actually going to end up with similar problems at the end.
But to clarify, you are generating this revenue from federal funding. None of this is coming from.
No, we have, so we're going to be generating, so we're looking to generate $65 million out of the vacant lots, the parking lots downtown in the city of Winnipeg, and using the tax dollars from that to fund a lot of these programs that I've been talking about. And the goal is not to, so for instance, a tax increase of 3.3% generates about $27 million in additional revenue for the city. I know people have affordability issues. I'm going after the people who have lots of money already. If you own a downtown surface parking lot, I do not believe that you are, counting your pennies when you're trying to pay for your bread and milk. You're not a senior on fixed income. So let's go after the people who either live in Montreal or Toronto or sometimes in Winnipeg, but who own these lands and who are not using them to the benefit of our community. So that's what I'm planning on doing.
Moving on to the police budget.
Oh, tough questions. Oh, geez, I'm talking a lot.
No worries. So Sierra, I'm doing covering the topic of the police budget, and I was just wondering what your general thoughts and feelings are towards the Winnipeg Police Service and their budget and their use of their budget.
Well, I'm as someone who was in the military for 27 years, I love law and order. I think it's important to have rules and regulations in society. But I also believe the police are being asked to do things that they are not equipped to do. They are not social workers, and they are not going to be able to come ahead of the whole issue surrounding crime in our city. While they're one of the important tools in that, they are not the ones who we should be relying on. And I think the usual way of politicians saying, well, just increase the police budget, year after year, decade after decade, has not worked. So we have taken the unusual and maybe courageous step to actually call for a freezing of the police budget. And then what we're going to do is any increase that was actually coming to the police budget is actually going to be put into a community safety fund that community groups have the opportunity of applying to. Also, the police can apply to that community safety fund, or they can apply in partnership. And the goal here is to drive some innovation in policing to address a lot of the safety and crime issues in our city. So the goal is to like get people thinking outside the box, out of some worn out, tired old boxes, to actually how you can actually make the streets safer, and how to actually improve the relationship with the police, to make them less complacent in what it is that they're doing. Now, how the police are actually going to go out and spend their actual budget, to be honest, I'm not an expert in policing. So, you know, if they want to have a police helicopter, that's up to them. If they decide that that's what they wish to allocate their budget towards, that is their choice. If they decide that they want to allocate more budget to doing different activities in the community, that's also their choice. But I'm going to be pushing them for more innovation. I've also combined this to actually make sure that there's more training for police officers in de-escalation, trying to actually advocate for national standards for policing for officers, which there are currently not national standards in Canada. This actually comes from Dave Castles, who was the former chief of police of the city of Winnipeg. So we're going to be following his lead and trying to, you know, advocate for this and making sure that our Winnipeg police officers are more trained. And finally, there's actually one other thing I think is extremely important for our police officers, is making sure that they have access to mental health supports themselves. I continually meet police officers who feel that they are under siege in everything that they do. And, you know, as someone who knew soldiers from working in Afghanistan, you know, they go on a mission and then, you know, they work 9-10 months somewhere, and then they come home and they have 2 years to decompress, to reconnect with their family. The Winnipeg Police Service, they go at it day after day after day, and they feel that they're under siege. And I think some of the incidences that have occurred recently have not been in their best interest, nor have been in the best interest of communities and of the city of Winnipeg.
For sure. And so you want to freeze the budget at $310 million, which you say will create an excess of $21 million over the 4 years. And
Yeah.
you want to create this community and innovation fund.
Yes.
Will the money the $21 million, will that be reserved specifically for the community and innovation fund, or will it be allocated to other services that you've?
The Community Innovation Fund.
It will be specifically for
Yes.
that? Yeah, for sure. And then from the money that comes from freezing the budget, if there's an excess money, how much money would you be allocating to specific community services that you've been talking about, such as homelessness, addictions, mental health?
From the Community Safety Fund?
Yeah, like if you had specific, if you could rank them,
Well, I think that question's never been asked, but the way I see it, that money would actually just be for the community groups to actually come up with initiatives on their own. I think what I've been talking about, like, with the addictions, the homelessness, and the mental health, and other challenges in the community, those would be separate funds.
Okay, for sure. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Crime prevention, moving on.
Hi, my name is Kalkiden. I'm going to be talking about crime prevention. So yeah, if I could just get your general thoughts, how you feel about crime prevention within the city of Winnipeg, how it's working right now, and what are your plans, I guess, to make it better in the future?
Yeah, so I think I've already talked quite a bit about the crime prevention, the whole issue, but, you know, I think a lot of the crime comes from related to the addiction issues. There are people who are criminals within the city. As someone who is, like, for instance, chair of the Human Trafficking Caucus, there is a lot of human trafficking that goes on in our city. And what I want police officers doing is not dealing with people who are suffering mental health challenges and homelessness issues and addictions issues. I want that as a healthcare issue, and making sure we have appropriate resources with healthcare providers, pharmacists, doctors, nurses, social workers, people who help people detox and get the addictions treatment they need. But I want police officers actually solving real crimes. And I think, because that's what they're supposed to be doing. There are so many crimes that go unsolved in the city right now. And we have some of the lowest crime solve rates in the country. I think we're at about 30%. We're in the 30% range. I have to check the specific data on that. But it's a huge challenge, I think, if you're only solving 30% of your crimes, 30% of your murders. It creates a sense that the city is unsafe. See, Winnipeg becomes known as being a crime capital. And I think there are so many other beautiful things about our city that we should be celebrating and making sure that people are aware of. And so I want to give the police the tools, or not the tools. What I want is the police to focus on what it is that they do well and not what they do not do well. I do not want a fish walking on land. I want the fish swimming in the water.
And then if you could give a little
No, I'm not putting in place a safe consumption site. I'm putting in place a supervised consumption site.
Supervised, sorry. So yeah, if you could give some specifics on the supervised consumption site, and like where would it go, how much would it cost, and where all that funding come from?
So where would it go? It'd probably have to be where people are. Obviously, we're not going to want to put that near. We're not going to put that in South St. Vital near the perimeter highway. So it's going to have to be where people are who are using drugs are. But we also, I believe, it should be combined with a healthcare center. In Calgary, we were able to. Had the tour a chance when I was on the health committee. We did a drug study, and we had the chance of touring the country, going to Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, and Winnipeg, seeing what was successful and not successful. And in Calgary, they were very successful in actually putting in place a supervised consumption site near a health center that people could then meet with doctors and nurses, and then be encouraged to seek treatment if they wanted treatment or different services. For instance, if they had feed issues or other healthcare issues, they could obtain those services immediately, even detox within 1 day. I repeat that, within 1 day. Here in the city of Winnipeg, right now it's 3 months. 1 day in Calgary. And the change for the community is substantial, because that means there are less people on the streets who are dealing with their drug addiction issues, meth crisis, psychosis, and other challenges. So the supervised consumption site ideally would be with the province in partnership, but if they do not want to do that, then I think the city has the full authority under federal legislation and rules and regulations from Health Canada to proceed on their own, and there is federal funding to do that. And I was proud to work with the federal government when I was the MP to put in place those measures. I didn't do it alone. We worked together. No one does anything on their own. No politician can say that they're going to do everything on their own. I want to put that out there. But, it's a collaborative effort of a lot of people working together. The Senate, the House of Commons members, the committee members, the ministers, the officials, the staffers who work with the minister's office, and doctors, nurses, people who are advocating for this.
I'm just going to interject for 1 second. The city's own study of a supervised consumption site said that for it to be sustainable, the province would have to be on board, because they are the deliverer of health services.
Yes.
Right? So yes, the city can apply for that federal exemption and have a supervised consumption site, but how do you ensure that it sticks around?
I think sometimes there's. How does it stick around? I think there is funds that you could get from the federal government. There is new Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Carolyn Bennett, who I work quite closely with, that still talk to on a monthly basis. There I think are ways of getting funds to sustain those types of programs. But I think if we continue to wait around for the province, and I think sometimes reports are made to say to the province, if you don't do this, this is what we're not going to be able to do this. And I think it's a bit of a political game. But at the end of the day, if someone doesn't want to work with you, the battle must continue, and you must move forward. You've got to keep going. You can't wait for everyone to always be in agreement. You can try, but society will not advance if you just wait for 100% agreement. You'll never get it. And that's why there's a provincial election on it. It's going to be a very interesting time in the next few months to get get some agreements in place, and it's going to be very important in the very short period after the municipal election for the mayor's office to really try and get those agreements and give wins to people. I think people often see it as an adversarial relationship, and it was for a long time, but sometimes you have to give in to someone on issues and make them feel like they have won, to give them that win. And so the reason, for instance, we use safe versus supervised is extremely important. I think it appeals to more people supervised, because you do have supervision by healthcare professionals, and you have that opportunity of getting healthcare services. You're trying to change the dialogue. I think people, when they say safe, they think it's willy-nilly, whatever's going on, and it who knows what's happening behind closed doors.
And then I have one last question. What are your plans to address violent crimes towards Indigenous women and girls within the city?
Wow. I think that's the first time anyone's asked that question in this entire election. I think there are some deep conversations that need to be had in our city. I know the police are moving in a good direction. when they're going into the garbage sites. There was a case this summer of someone being murdered and chopped up and killed, and it was an Indigenous woman. It's terrible that occurred, and the police, I think, were very good in working with the family and trying to help locate the body in an appropriate way. And I've spoken with some of the police officers involved. The violence against Indigenous women, I think, requires a much more substantive look at how we deal with a lot of the addictions and the crime issues in our city, and how we deal with prostitution in our city, and how we look at women in general. And I think this issue is actually a men's issue, and I don't think there's enough tough conversations with men. When you see marches go on in the downtown core, and it's mostly Indigenous women with allies, I think a lot of people who have very comfortable lives push it to the side, say, it's not me. And there are conversations, though, that need to be had. And so when I was in Ottawa, we had something called the Moose Hide campaign. I don't know if you've heard about it. No? The Moose Hide campaign, I'm wearing one right now. It was started out near Prince George in British Columbia, near the Highway of Tears. A father and a daughter, a very young daughter, they believe she was around 10 at the time, had hunted a moose, and they caught a moose. And the dad didn't want the moose hide, he just wanted the meat. But the daughter said, you can't waste the animal. So they kept the moose hide, and they were talking about it on the way back home, and they said, well, we could raise more awareness. We could cut these into little patches to raise awareness about the violence against Indigenous women and girls, and all girls and children. And so they tanned the hide in Victoria, in the suburbs, Indigenous father and daughter, and then they started handing them out. And in Ottawa, we would gather with all the ministers and the deputy ministers, the generals, the commissioners of the RCMP, and we would fast for the entire day. We wouldn't eat for an entire day, and we would have discussions around violence against men, women, children, girls, and about what we could do, specifically with women and girls, to stop that violence in our position. What policy changes would we need to be making? So, for instance, if you're the RCMP commissioner, what changes do you need to be making, or the assistant deputy commissioner? When you see a policy, does it actually help, or does it hinder? Those are like really, sometimes, tough conversations, because sometimes we think we don't have an influence, but when you start thinking about it, there are so many policies that go through our society that people don't think about. They just, we don't read them really, and we just check a box. And a lot of politicians don't take the time to actively think about like how a policy impacts people, nor do officials. And so it's important for people in leadership positions to take that time to consider what it is they can do, because that's what's going to make things a little bit better every day. So when you do allocate resources, are you allocating resources to things that are helping or hindering? When we talk about food security, when we talk about housing, when we talk about families and children, are there enough places for people to go who are not just homeless, but just are suffering violence at home in our city? Are there enough resources? There are likely not enough resources in our city. And not just with Indigenous communities, even within Muslim communities, within newcomer communities, within European communities. There are so many things that we could be doing, but we don't think about it because it doesn't really concern us. But sometimes it's good to take that moment to reflect, as men especially, about what we could be doing.
Mr. Ouellette, we are out of time.
Out of time.
We have a room situation here.
No issues. I will end with one final thing. Today, I announced a policy change for the 150th anniversary of the city of Winnipeg. Next year will be the 150th anniversary of our city, and I think it's an opportunity for the city to actually think about what we actually want to create as a city. So how are we involving arts and culture? Are we inviting Winnipeggers back to our city? What are we doing to make ourselves proud about our city and celebrating who we are? I think for a long time with the pandemic and what's going on, a lot of people are not proud about our city. And what I would say is, for so long, we have our young people moving away to Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. I'd love to build a city where we have a diverse, thriving city with a great arts scene, arts culture that is working really well, where people from Montreal, Calgary, Toronto want to move to Winnipeg instead, where they want to start their lives because it's affordable here, where they want to build a family here, where we do not have homelessness, or if we do, it's just a very small amount, where there is some addictions. Obviously, we're not going to eliminate all of these problems, but where it's actually at a very manageable level, and where people can say, you know, this is a beautiful city to live in, where it's a vibrant downtown, where there are businesses, there you go out at night and you're not afraid at 10 o'clock at night. You don't have to be like Tina Fontaine. We do not have to be like people finding themselves beaten almost to death in the streets, or not afraid to come out at night from Red River College late at night after a class. Those are the normal Canadian experiences, and I think we deserve it as well. But I think if I could make the final pitch, I think it's time to elect someone who's a little bit different than most politicians, who has a bit of a different lived life experience, who is not going to willingly accept just being told, well, this is just how things are done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Tapwe, kitwam. Tapwe means truth, and kitwam means till next time. You guys made me talk for 46 minutes. Blabbing.